All right, the first French language debate. What difference did it make? Let's try to find out. Andrew is in Toronto, Chantel's in Montreal, Bruce is in Ottawa. And Chantel, let's start with you in general terms. What did you make of what you witnessed for 2 hours tonight?
I thought that Thomas Mulcair, who was playing defense as the front runner, probably did as best as he could to shelter his Quebec Foundation from Gilles Ducep's efforts to come back at his expense. And I suspect he probably succeeded in keeping the Bloc at bay. I'm curious to see, though, whether Stephen Harper, who I thought had a good night, he wasn't the loudest person on the set, but I think he beat the expectations. He looked a lot nicer and a lot less aggressive than the image that Quebecers have of him. And there's been a kind of increase in conservative support in Quebec, and I'm curious to see whether Mr. Mulcair fought well against Gilles Duceppe, only to find out that he now has to contend with more conservative support in Quebec.
And he was certainly positioned as the centerpiece on the night, and a number of people have asked me today, you know, do they run there when they get to the studio to grab the podium they want? No, it's actually not that way. It's by draw, but as it turned out, he was in the place where everybody was coming at him, so it was interesting. Andrew, your take?
I actually expected him to come under more fire than he did, but there were moments, certainly, and I thought he actually was a bit nettled. I agree with Chantel. I don't think there was any sort of terrible damage done, but I don't think he looked terribly great, particularly the moment, of course, on the whole water exports question, where he's got a very difficult message to sell, shall we say, that somehow he didn't say what is on video of him saying. I thought Justin Trudeau was much better tonight than he was last time, much more composed, much cooler, didn't shout as much, and whether that moves votes or not, I don't know. But to the extent that people might be choosing Mulcair over Trudeau because he looks more prime ministerial, I think Trudeau has successively closed the stature gap somewhat. It's still there, but it's not as wide as it used to be. Mr. Duceppe was his crafty self. He did, I think, quite well. He's got a very eclectic mix of policies he's putting forward, and we think we saw that tonight. But he carried it off well. Mr. Harper, I agree, was, similar to the English debate, was cool and avuncular and as close to avuncular as he gets. I'm just not sure he was that much of a factor tonight, and certainly Elizabeth May was not. You
mentioned the water debate, and we are going to take a look at it a little later in this discussion because it's an interesting one, see how it plays out. Bruce, your take.
Well, Peter, I thought it was actually a pretty good debate. I thought, notwithstanding the fact that not everybody spoke French with the same level of fluency, all of the leaders knew what they wanted to say tonight and said it pretty well for the most part. And so I think people who stayed with it actually got something out of it. Whether it'll change things, I don't know that it'll change anything instantly, but I do think that what people heard and how they experience these leaders probably will affect the way that they vote. It just may take a little bit of time to soak in. I thought Mr. Harper had an opportunity to speak to a large audience and explain the reasons why he felt he should be reelected, and he did that as well as he probably could, given that Quebec is not a particularly fertile ground for him. It remains to be seen how much upside there was for him. I was most interested, I guess, in the choice between Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Trudeau. I agree with Andrew. I thought Mr. Trudeau was kind of cogent and coherent. He was maybe a little bit less present than he had been in the last debate, but he was also a little bit more calm. And remains to be seen how voters in Quebec will react to that version of him, I suppose. For Mr. Mulcair, he was either the strongest person on the stage or the most emotional, depending on how you choose to view him. And I could see moments where I thought, well, he really is in command of that stage and driving home his points. But I also saw some moments where if people were fearing this notion of an angry Tom as Prime Minister, there were flashes of that for sure.
Just a point, in Quebec, the angry Tom thing doesn't really exist. It's something that is common outside Quebec, but it has never been an issue here that he looks angry or he looks emotional. Actually, debates here do tend to be sometimes a bit more passionate, and that is why they're called debates.
So if he is an angry Tom, that's a good thing in Quebec.
There was a couple of moments I thought where he was a little bit dismissive of the others, and I guess maybe that's what I was focusing on. It remains to be seen whether anybody took any umbrage at that, but it was remarkable, I agree.
I didn't think he looked, I have to say, I did not think he looked in command. His body language didn't say that. The emotions, I mean, the emotions can cut both ways. They can be a plus, but in this case, it did not look like I'm in control here. It looked like I'm sort of on the edge here.
I watched Philippe Couillard go through the same process and be on the defensive for an entire debate, and all of us came out saying he, didn't master that podium at all tonight, and then he won the debate and the election.
Yeah. Well, sometimes when it's a gang up, the people tend to side with the person who's being ganged up on. So, as you say, we're all going to have to kind of wait and see how that plays out. If there were a number of sort of firestorms and mini firestorms. The first one was around the whole issue of the niqab, which has been a constant issue in Quebec. Terry showed us a bit of this in his item at the top of the news, but let me show you some of it again, and then we'll try and get to understanding why this continues to play out as an issue, especially so in Quebec. Here it is.
We should not have a state that imposes how a woman should not get dressed.
The first bill that would be filed by the Bloc Québécois will be very clear: prohibit votes with covered face during oath-taking and during any public service.
When we join the Canadian family, we should not hide our identity.
But it's not by depriving these women of their citizenship and their right that you're going to help them. You're going to sign the nomination papers of
even your candidates.
One at a time, please.
What is the impact of the niqab on the economy? What is the impact of the niqab on climate change? What is the impact of the niqab for the unemployment? It's a false debate.
All right, well, actually, to pick up on Elizabeth May's point, you help us out here, Chantal. Why is that issue playing out so heavily in a campaign that most people say is really about the economy? Why is this one something that has attracted so much attention?
Because it's an extension of Quebec's recent charter debate, because it may not have filtered greatly to the rest of the country, but the current Liberal government in the National Assembly has brought in a bill that is being debated now with support from every party that would force people to unveil, to provide and receive public services in this province. And on this, the issue of taking the oath with your face unveiled, there is unanimity in the National Assembly. Denis Coderre, the mayor of Montreal, is in favor. I think the numbers run 80% or more saying if you're taking the oath of citizenship, you should unveil. So it is a debate that has been ongoing for years now here, and this is part and parcel of the debate. It is also the first time in this campaign that both Stephen Harper and Gilles Duceppe found an issue that has actually moved votes away from the NDP that opposes the niqab ban.
But Peter, this is, yet again an illustration of why we should not have linguistically segregated debates, because this wasn't the French debate. Yet again, it was the Quebec debate. Now, if we want to have a debate about the peculiar obsessions of Ontario or of the West, that's fine. But to take one of the very few opportunities the public has to watch these leaders close up and to spend such a proportion of that time talking about this question of whether a few dozen women should have to wear a veil, or not be allowed to wear a veil in a citizenship ceremony, or whether they should do it in a private room beforehand, it's ridiculous.
Actually, support for a niqab ban in Canada, according to polls done for the federal government, runs over 75%. So it's not a Quebec issue. Now, nobody is stopping.
It's not an issue that is germane to the future of this country. It is a trivial issue in the grand scheme of things.
It is an issue that is of interest to the voters in this province and to most of the Canadians who have answered that question. Now, as far as I can tell, there's not a list of this is an issue you can debate and this is of no interest to us in Toronto, so why should you care about it in Montreal, ever have a discussion about it? An election is about more than whatever is set in the editorial boardrooms of Toronto as what matters to the country.
Of course, and it's also about something other than just who can pander to the lowest common denominator on these issues.
So 5 minutes
to frame
out of
a debate around to frame
5
what
minutes.
a third of the debate around this is ridiculous.
No, 5 minutes. Maybe the translation took longer, but 5 minutes out of the entire debate was on the niqab issue.
All right.
I know it sounded very long, but it was 5 minutes.
All right, good discussion. Healthy differences there. Bruce, you didn't get in on it, but Bruce, answer me this and try and do it quickly. Is it an issue, given what you see in your polling data, that a result could turn on in a region like Quebec?
Yes, I think it is that kind of issue. But I also think that it is one of those, every time I hear this discussed, I think of that Paul Simon lyric, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. People on the one side of this hear it and they think, this is about that act of citizenship, and it's about, it shouldn't inconvenience people too much. And others find all kinds of reasons, all very valid to them, for saying we shouldn't really be talking about this. This isn't an important issue for the country. And people obviously, even as you heard just a couple of minutes ago, feel quite strongly about this.
All right. I want to move on to the second clip we're going to show. And Andrew referred to it earlier, and this whole issue of water exports and what Tom Mulcair's past sayings on this issue, how they compare with what he is saying now. Watch this exchange.
We're speaking about oil today, but when we think of the years to come, there's going to be a lot of concerns surrounding water. We're speaking of exporting water, but Mr. Mulcair, who likes to talk about the fact that he was an environment minister here in Quebec, was proposing exporting bulk water to the United States.
Is spectacularly false.
Not at all.
Again,
we have a video of you saying that.
It shows that he lacks total experience.
You're on the record, Mr. Mulcair.
In the context of a debate.
He's not saying the truth.
And the restrictions, the most severe restriction in North America.
It would be like the forestry sector.
Mr. Trudeau, don't you understand that sometimes you need to have debates?
All right. Justin Trudeau basically calling Tom Mulcair a liar on this, comparing some of his old remarks to where he is now on the issue of water exports. Andrew, you mentioned it. Tell me whether this is important and what's important about it.
The Liberals have been sort of picking away at this for some time, and it's obviously a source of weakness for them. It's not that, in my opinion, that there's anything terribly wrong about the idea of exporting water. It depends how you do it. You can do it in an environmentally responsible way or an irresponsible way. But for the voters that both of those parties are going after, it has a kind of a talismanic thing of, oh my goodness, we can't export water. That would be destroying the soul of Canada. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Mulcair has talked about it in the past, and he's got a very difficult row to hoe to try and claim that he didn't. And I think the Liberals are pouncing on that for good reason.
Chantal, you want to get in on that?
As far as I understand that clip of Thomas Mulcair, he was saying that it would be great if it was possible to have an adult discussion over water exports. He wasn't saying it would be great to have water exports. Now we go back to the core argument. Is it okay to discuss and debate issues, or is it not, because they should be taboo? But I've not heard it, and I don't think it is seen here as an endorsement of exporting water.
Bruce?
Well, I think the larger issue is really Mr. Mulcair's record as environment minister and his environmental credentials. That's one of the things I think that Mr. Trudeau really wants to kind of poke away at a bit. But I do think that Mr. Mulcair is making one sound argument, which is that you should be able to have a debate about this. I don't agree with Chantal that that's what is on the tape, at least to my eyes and ears. On the tape, I interpret the comments of Mr. Mulcair as being, open to this idea at least, and anxious to see whether or not there's a way to do it. So maybe it's a gray line, but it certainly seems like it's at least a worthwhile line of attack for Mr. Trudeau.
All right. I've only got, I've got less than 2 minutes left. So on the old question of did anything happen tonight that is fundamentally going to alter things, we all agree that making that judgment right away is sometimes hard and perhaps foolish. But let's enter that zone anyway. Anything obvious jump out at you that says, hey, this is a different ball game now? Andrew?
No, the only thing I would say is I do think the improved performance of Trudeau, whether it'll move votes in Quebec or not, I don't know, but I think it's part of, they do seem to have, if anybody's got any momentum at all, there does seem to be some movement towards the Liberals, and I think he did his cause some good tonight.
Chantal?
I don't think the earth moved, but I think many Quebecers saw more of Thomas Mulcair today in one evening than they did over his past few years as leader of the opposition. So they'll have to decide whether, in the end, that is someone they like to see having had more exposure to his views.
All right, Bruce, you get the last word.
Well, I think for many voters, this is probably really just the start of the election campaign. And so if they did tune in Quebec and they watched these leaders, they would have come away with a pretty clear picture of who they are and how different they are. I do think it will affect how they vote, but I think it's far too early for us to really figure that out right now.
All right. Listen, good discussion. And I'm sure we're going to have a few more over the next couple of weeks. Andrew's in Toronto, Chantal's in Montreal, and Bruce is in Ottawa.